Start. So
Okay, so we're
feel free.
calling this meeting to order on September 29th of the Task Force for Street Funding for the City of Edina. In attendance is Ahmed, Chip, Kathy, Matt, David, Don, Chad, and myself, Ann. The purpose of this meeting today is to come up with up to three scenarios to discuss further in a group meeting that we're going to have in October that we will also tape. And those are my comments. Do you have any comments, Chad?
Yep, we'll have that meeting at Public Works. That's going to be an audio recorded meeting, similar to what we do with our work sessions. The City Council will have a couple audio devices in there, record the audio and make that public. You didn't tell me a sandwich order. Tell me what you want for dinner that night. We'll get you a sandwich order from Jimmy John's. Then everyone has the agenda. I tried to summarize what I received from all the task force members. So the number 4 of the agenda is the summary of those thoughts, which I know we're going to talk about. And then in the appendix is everybody's raw comments. So I know people wanted to share reasons why, but wanted to get kind of a point where we can just see the options instead of having pages and pages of text. So all those raw information is in the appendix of this agenda. I can share it if we want to. Otherwise, I guess I'll leave it up to Ann and how you want to proceed with the discussion.
Can't hear you.
Ann, you're on mute.
First, I'm going to ask everyone to put their microphones on mute, since I was on mute, when you're not talking, so we don't get any feedback. Apparently, a couple people are getting feedback. So what I was going to ask everyone is your final solution in a couple sentences. We've all probably read them, but and we'll start with Ahmed.
Sorry. Hi. Yeah, my my proposed final solution, given all the discussions we've had, the logistics of of franchise fees, difficulties of that, I tend towards taxes, especially given Don's numbers that seemed relatively reasonable and small to spread the burden of the of the costs. I have outlined my reasons in that appendix that Chip kindly put at the end of the statement. And so if you like, I can go through those, but those are all there. So I think taxes are going to be the most straightforward, the clearest, the cleanest way going forward. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Chip?
I agree with a movement towards the property taxes, but maintaining a goodly portion of the cost under special assessments. But I do suggest that we carve out of what would be the special assessments, the subcut and the street lighting. I think that should be part of the property tax burden. But I did the 70-30 sort of split because I think there still should be a good portion of the total cost to be borne by the people who are living on the street. And then there's a portion that the whole town benefits from. But the 70% that's a special assessment should exclude those kind of surprise costs that come with the subcut, but and so be more reasonable and manageable and understandable going forward. One other comment is I think it's I'm not in favor of anything that would incorporate a sort of creating an escrow fund or delaying the rollout of something until the first wave is done, because that's another 25 years. And in essence, there's going to probably be another task force or two between now and then. So the point of this task force, I think, is fairly de minimis in the whole sense of things. And then the second point being with the escrow fund, that would basically have people putting money in now that they'd never potentially see any benefit from. I think it ought to be more on a current pay basis, and not have somebody put money in that's not going to be used for 20 years. So that's my summary.
I have a question. So I made a couple different notes. In your 70-30 split, is the 70% assessed to the homeowner, or is it paid by city taxes that everyone pays?
70% would be the homeowner, 30% would be property taxes, but the subcut would be
Right.
separate in property taxes. So,
Okay.
for the total cost, it would be, a little less than 70-30, probably more like 60-40 or something.
I see that in the notes. I see 70% property tax, 30% special assessment.
I've mixed up the numbers. So I went back and looked at Chip's original notes, and it is just what he said. So I'll change it in the agenda up in number 4. I just had it wrong. Thank you.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. Matt?
Hey, I'll turn my video on just for my comments. And again, I'm taking it in my car today on my phone internet, so that's why I'm turning my video off. I kind of propose that we continue with the assessment policy, but that we take the subcut issue and put that onto the property tax to kind of alleviate some of the burden. And I also think that we should move toward some form of a street financing fund. And my reasoning here is first and foremost because Chip, although I understand, the concept that they're paying in now and it's something that you might not benefit from in the future, if we get to the end of the 25 years and you have to start over again, there will be some homeowners who are going to be essentially double taxed. So that's one thing that's a little challenging for me, that they're going to be assessed and then we're switching over to property tax, and then all of a sudden they're also going to be paying. So by having a retained balance, you're going to limit the total amount that you're going to have to charge people. I am sort of agnostic as to whether that needs to be a property tax or a franchise fee. I know some folks on the council or on the commission here have kind of mentioned that they think franchise fees are regressive. I actually disagree with that assessment because franchise fees in and of themselves are a user fee. We all generate trips from our house, and therefore they're not regressive, in my opinion. So the second round, I think moving away from assessments would be my preference, because then it's more focused on people who are living here. And a couple conversations I've had that I think Edina residents, about 4% of them turn over every year. And as a result of that, I think that the utility fee or some sort of thing of that nature would be my preference moving forward, because people do have a tendency to live here for a long time.
So Ralph, we're going along and talking about what our solution is. I keep seeing you raise your hand. Did you want to talk next?
So I thought we were going to talk about solution rather than why we didn't like stuff. I thought this was, you asked for a discussion of just exactly what the solution was rather than the rationale and everything else behind it. I mean, if you're looking for a general discussion, that's fine. But my solution recommendation is just that we convert the end goal per Chip's suggestion weeks ago. What do we see the end being? The end being that 100% of the funding would come from property taxes.
Kath, next. Remember to turn on your microphone, Kathy.
And I
Is that, am I good? My proposal was 50-50, 50 moving to tax basis, but I was clear that the tax should be collected one year and used the next, because I'm not in favor of the trust idea. And then the second part of my proposal was to continue with an assessment, but different than today with the REU, to do something based on property value. And I know Chad was thoughtful enough to include a an example of that in the notes. What I like about that is it doesn't require a transition in any way, and it's more equitable to neighborhoods where we have, a $400,000 house and a $4 million house, and that people pay something more in line with the property value. So that's what I proposed. I didn't mention anything on subcut, but since several people have, I would also be very agreeable to taking that out of the assessments and paying for it elsewhere. Is that
Chad,
an answer? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to ask Chad a question about your proposal, Kathy. So Chad, is that the way that Kathy would like it charged? Is that something that our attorney said we couldn't do if we did a project as a group of homes? Or did she change it because it's not REUs, it's based on the value of the home, and then maybe we could, but I don't think we can.
Oh.
That was sorry, that was a run-on sentence.
So the question is, can we do it exclusively property values? So you have 100 property with 100 different assessments. That is what I heard, that we can't do that. One of the talked with Kathy yesterday, hear it did, where you have, remember, people of one side of the street had $10,000, the other side had 20,000 assessments, but they were consistent across property class. So could you create property classes within a neighborhood and maybe have 3 tiers of assessments? Well, that's kind of the question I want to raise to David next week or even before we meet again to see if that's a possible option. Kathy just shared that she would love more of a tiered type system, but tier, is it property values, property size? I don't know how that works, but I think that's a question for the attorney. Is there a method to do that?
If I could make one more comment on that, Chad and I talked about this, and I think one reason I like linking it to value, the tax value, is we always know that value. If we had to have 3 tiers of properties, we're going to have to keep changing them. But I too sent a note to David Kendall asking him how he defines uniform, consistent, et cetera, and I haven't got an answer to that.
Okay, I'm going to call on David first, and then Ahmed, I'll come back to you because David hasn't gotten to speak yet.
Good morning. My preference is a long-term solution without regard to transition complexities of 100% funding through taxes. I guess my main rationale is I've tried and I can't really come up with the real benefit to assessment structures generally. And if you consider, so that's my long-term solution. If you consider transition complexity, I think in Chad's number 4 on the agenda, C and C2 are my preferred solutions if you reflect transition.
You had something you wanted to say? Did you have something you wanted to say? You were raising your hands. Your
You're
mic's
muted,
off.
Ann. Who are you asking, Ann? The name didn't come out.
Ahmed.
Oh, hi. Yeah. No, I just was going to make a small comment. I totally agree with Dave's point about taxes, but I just want to make a small point observation with regard to the what I understand David Kendall responded to the same kind of question I had that Ann you raised to Chad. And that what I understood, although this is still needs to be cleared absolutely with David Kendall, is that where you could do tiering is if somehow there was a geographic cluster, but like if a middle value house is between 2 large houses or something. I think that does make the special assessment slightly more appealing, but I got a sense that it had to be somehow a geographic cluster. I could be wrong about that, but that was my impression in the interaction that we had with him the other day. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Sure. Don, one of the questions that keeps coming up is if we are going to 100% special assessment or something up to that, anything between, 50, 70, and 100%. When we have to pay for that as a city and we have to bond, if we don't collect it ahead of time and we bond for it, where is the debt level in the city that affects our bond rating, our AAA bond rating? Because that,
I think,
we're going to want to know that before we start discussing final recommendations.
okay.
So anything you can do to talk to the guys at Ellers to figure that out maybe would be really great. I know they always walk us through the bond ratings with the two major companies. So if we need Ellers, I'd like it ahead of time because I don't really think, Chad, do you think we need someone from Ellers at this next meeting?
I'll leave that up to Don's.
Yeah. And I don't think we need anybody from Ellers.
Okay, we just need the information from Ellers is how do we make sure that we don't affect our bond rating with any of these
Kathy
assessments?
has a question.
I see Kathy first and Chip after Kathy.
I'm wondering if you could just explain kind of quickly what the issue is. What could affect our bond rating?
Well, I'll let Don answer that, but I know it's important to the council, which is why I'm concerned about it.
Yeah. So Kathy, we have one of the highest bond ratings in the country. So AAA rated by Moody's and S&P. Really, the only thing that I can think of that would impact our bond rating is some major catastrophe that would prevent us from actually making bond payments. Both Moody's and S&P have commented historically on how much debt we have, but the positives that Edina has far outweigh the amount of debt. And I would just say if we continue, because we currently issue debt for the street reconstruction special assessment bonds for 15 years. So if we continue our program by issuing debt and nothing else really changes, I don't see an issue with it.
But, I will tell you, Don, before you came onto the city, we had a rating and we were told that it was when Minneapolis, I think, rated their school fund to keep their city going. We were told that even that could affect our bond rating. I remember it at the time because I was kind of shocked that they would look at the community around us to do that. So could you just, though, confirm with Ellers? And if there is an amount that they don't want us to go over, I think we need to know that. Okay, Chip, you had your hand up after Kathy.
Right, thanks. Well, Ann, I just thought we haven't heard your thoughts on the ultimate endpoint.
Thanks for asking. My thoughts are this, that I am comfortable eventually going to some percentage of city payment where we tax all of our city ahead of time. I still think that homes should have what I call some skin in the game. So I'm somewhere around 50% for that. And certainly I know that our attorney has proved that that would be something that we could do and legally, and because we've taken it down from what we do currently. I'm also one of those people, I think we should take the subcut out no matter what we do, for next year, because I think that's something that the city should be responsible for, what should have been built correctly in the first place. So we shouldn't be charging our residents for correction. I'm one of those that is also not really opposed to franchise fees. So when we get to that topic, I can speak on that. So mine is probably a 50-50 final. However, I have strong ideas of how we get there. Have we exhausted our solutions enough that we know that assessments is part of the solution that we're going to be discussing on the 12th? It will be either 100%, it'll be 50%. And then from there, we're going to be backing up. Chip, since this was originally, I think, your request that we look at solutions as to how we get there in the near term.
You said assessments, you mean taxes?
Yeah.
100% taxes, somewhere between 50 and 100% taxes. Yes, sorry. Hammond?
I do recall, again, from David Kendall's point that he made, the discussions we had, that Don and Chad, correct me, I know Ann wasn't there on the day. He mentioned a number 40%. I can't from the neighboring towns and communities in terms of the percentage of the total road construction budget that came from special assessments. What I can't remember is whether that 40% was an average number or the maximum that he had seen. He said, I can't remember where he said he hasn't seen anything beyond 40%, or was it the average number? Do you guys remember, Chad and Don?
I think you just referenced Edina is unique in having currently 100% assessments. Typically, you see other communities 20, 25, 40%. I don't even think you see too many at 50. So it's typically below 50% is what he typically sees, probably in some of the other clients that Campbell Knutson has.
Yeah.
I think he was just generally speaking. I don't think he had any study to back it up.
Specific. Okay. Right,
Yeah, I took notes from your meeting. I watched it and I don't have that written down. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. No. Okay. Just wanted to get clarification.
Let's reverse the order and talk about what you don't like to be included in the solution as far as funding, and we'll start with Ralph.
So I concur with the group that kind of from what we've heard is that the subcut, should come out. I think that from my perspective, if we sit down and have a more detailed discussion, that it'll become clear that to postpone, if we agree that it should be funded by property taxes, that it doesn't make sense to wait 25 years to do that. But that's a detailed discussion, I think more appropriate to the whiteboard. Some of the information that I forget whether it was Chad or who shared it, but with respect to the turnover in Edina, I think Don actually had shared that 4% of people in Edina leave or at least turnover. When you match that up with the percentages of people who've actually experienced a street assessment, you end up with only about 25% of the current population has experienced on a percentage basis a street assessment, and that percentage will be the same today. It'll be the same percentage 5 years from now. It'll be the same percentage 50 years from now. So there's no benefit if we feel that that's the solution. There's no benefit to saying that, well, gee, it's now fair because everybody will have experienced a street assessment. That flat out won't be the case.
Can you
David?
walk through your math on the 25%? Because you said that on average, at any given time, 25% of homeowners would have experienced an assessment. Can you walk through how that comes to pass?
So at a 4% turnover rate, and I'm not sure exactly, I mean, that's the number that Don shared, correct? Just give a thumbs up, Don. That at a 4% turnover rate, and we can dive into what that really means, but if you just take it at its face value, that 4% of Edinans leave Edina, then over 25 years, 100% of the people have turned over. 25 times 4 is 100%. If we say that we're on a 50-year cycle to redo all the roads, that means at any point in time, 2% of the people have experienced a street assessment. In any particular year, 2% of the people have experienced a street assessment.
And
If it takes 50 years to complete all the streets, you're doing 2% of the streets a year.
Don, a question for Don, just to clarify this point. Don, is the 4% people that leave Edina, or is it also, does it include people moving from home to home within Edina? Because the question of, you know, somebody being encountering twice a special assessment would be a relevant point to this discussion. Just want to understand if you have any numbers on that.
Yeah, so this was purely based on sales. You know, we have 12,000 single family properties and so many sold. What's that change? So those people could have, you know, they could have moved anywhere within Edina, outside of Edina, anything else. This was really just to give you a rough estimate of what's happening.
And I think if I remember my statistics of people that live in Edina, that there's a high number of people that live in Edina over 25 years, higher than any other community, actually. Edina has the highest move back ratio too of any community almost in the nation. So where yes, it's a raw number of house sales. I don't think maybe, Ralph, it's as accurate a figure as you want for people who come and go from Edina.
It actually doesn't make any difference whether it's 4% or not at the end logic. It just, the 4% only emphasizes and makes it more compelling.
Okay, for you. David, as to ways of funding this that are not on the table for you.
I don't think there's anything that's unacceptable to me except status quo. I mean, I think we need to have some sort of change. I'm not somewhere like you were saying before, and somewhere between 50% and 100% taxes is probably going to be okay with me. But I guess I would like to have a conversation at some point. Is, you know, when we say skin in the game, I can't quite get my head around what benefit that's actually delivering to the city or to its residents. So I'd like to understand more about that.
Matt? Matt, do you have?
Dan,
okay.
I'm back. Sorry, yeah, there were two things. One to me is if we were going to do a complete shift away from assessments at present. And my thinking here is that I just don't think that it's politically feasible for the council. I don't think they'd be interested in voting for that, to move 100% away from it at the present time. To do so would really upset anyone who's had a home recently assessed. And the second one is using the property tax to foot a significant portion of street construction. And the reason is that if we were to shift over 100% to property tax, I understand that's where I'd probably be comfortable with ending. Right now, you're going to be creating a system of dual taxation for those people who've recently been assessed, because they're still paying off in large part the entirety of their assessment. There's no way to refund that. We found that out through our conversations with the lawyer. And then they're going to be paying for 25 other rounds of street assessments. So to me, significantly going toward the property tax is not really an option either.
Kathy, unmute your microphone. Okay.
I think I did. Three things that I would put on that list. I'm not in favor of franchise fees. I think they are regressive to lower income people. I'm not supportive of a long-term trust. Pretty much hearing Don's comment last time that he doesn't want to manage a lot of money. And also that, you know, certainly cities and states have taken those trusts and used money for other things. So I'm not in favor of a long-term trust. The third thing I am not supportive is moving to something like taxes without a really good transition plan, kind of picking up on what Matt was saying, that we take care of those, financially take care of those that have recently paid assessments. And I think that would be important to the council too. I think they would hear a lot of grief if we didn't do some sort of a transition as we move into some kind of taxation.
Thank you. Chip?
Yeah, I'm not well, nobody's mentioned it, so maybe it's nobody's considering having the city issue any debt to fund some of this stuff, which I'm glad to see. I wouldn't want to see that be part of the equation. I'm not a big fan of increasing the franchise fees. I think that the franchise fees today, as I understand it, do go to, is it street lighting and some other things, maybe the bike paths. I would, keeping the fees where they are and having them used the way they are, I think is okay. I would not want to increase the franchise fees to fund individual street reconstruction that has previously been 100% special assessment. I think that's a regressive and isn't a very fair way of sharing that burden. I think we all are concerned about the transition, and that's a big hurdle, and that's why I think it's good to just try to isolate what the end we want to get to is, and then we can figure it out, the pathway to get there. So I don't think we should be so worried about what that transition is. Let's just figure out what it is we think is the end point we want to be at, and when we think that should be.
Well, I'll tell you that part of the discussion at the council the last couple times has been that transition issue. So they're going to want us to weigh in on that. So I think that is probably our biggest challenge at our next meeting, is that is what they've asked us to come up, as you said, with a solution, but tell us how you think it would be equitable to get there.
Agree at all, but I think we can that's part of the mission, but I don't think we can figure out what the transition is until we know what the end goal is.
Totally okay with that. And I'll get back to you, Ralph, in a minute, but let's have Ahmed say anything that for him is off the table.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking for my input on that. I think that for me, a couple of things would be off the table. One, just like Kathy, I would argue that trust is having a trust fund is a in my view is sort of a dubious concept, in that managing it, the issue, is complicated and so politically complicated as well. So I would have that off the table. Also, having I sort of understand and agree with the principle that Ralph brought out in terms of people impacted adversely by having special assessments, hitting them. So what I would like to perhaps have David Kendall help us walk through is the following. I know for all of us, transition is the key. And to the extent that whether we think about 50-50 between tax and special assessment, or 100%, as some of us like myself think, and so on, we still have this issue of fairness and transition. And I'd like to still maybe explore the technicalities with David Kendall with respect to what is it that can be done. I mean, I totally understand that if I had just paid special assessment, I wouldn't want to pay an extra $400 or $500 of taxes just for that, once again, for the next, 10, 15 years. I totally get that. But there's got to be ways in which we could address that. And I think that if we could figure something out, we really put our heads on that, I think that would solve maybe both the political issue with respect to council, and it really helps us move forward. We've spent some time thinking about that, but if Ralph is right, and there's very few people impacted by that perhaps is not as large a political issue as we think it might be, although I
Oh,
do
yeah.
not know. It is. Okay. Okay.
It
I
is.
stand corrected. Okay. Fine. Fine. But I do think that we may not have explored all the legalities of somehow finding a way of redressing these concerns. Maybe that's one of the ways in which we should spend some of our time thinking about, because I agree that with Chip, that to have a clear goal is very important. I agree totally. And that's why I said, okay, tax, whenever it's the clear. But it is true that some paths are more difficult to get to than other paths due to this transition challenge. So if I don't know, but I don't know specifically what are the legal obstacles. I know that David Kendall mentioned we cannot have property taxes, incidents on different households and so on and so forth. But are there other ways of doing that?
Okay, we can certainly ask him ahead of time. I'm not going to want to spend a lot of time. I want that answer clear, Chip, before we start. I thought he was pretty clear on that, but if he missed something, Chad, you might want to check in with him. Ralph raised his hand, and after Ralph, it's going to be, Chad, will you check in with him? Ralph raised his hand first, and then we'll have Chip. Okay, so Ralph?
So I guess the key question coming back to, so if we look 25 years from now and say that's when we're going to postpone our decision, how is that decision in transition going to be any less hurtful than it is today? And so I think that's a question that I would like to hear Ann and Matt answer, not necessarily today, but for our discussion, our on-site discussion, is that at the end of the day, if we believe that there should be a change, then how is it less impactful to those people? Because the people who live here today or lived here 25 years ago when the first street assessment was done aren't going to be here 25 years from now. And number two, I think that if we look at Kathy's solution with respect to property values, it really comes back very closely to assessment through property taxes, because property taxes are in fact based on property values. And you don't get into all the complexity of the tiered thinking.
You got like
Yeah.
me? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a request for the next sessions in terms of some details. And this relates to the subcut costs historically and with what we know about the ones upcoming. I can't remember, Chad, with all the stuff that you've sent out, if we had breakouts of subcut versus the other components of the charges. I know you had made a comment at least that subcut was between 10 and maybe 25% of the total cost, but I think if we're going to be thinking about treating subcut differently in the future than the way it has been in the past, I think we need to understand the historical experience of what that cost was relative to each special assessment.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, Chip, I got my notes here actually from when I brought that up a few meetings ago. So subcut, we analyzed project next year. We looked at one like last year and then one about 4 years ago. It takes quite a bit of time to dig in the numbers, but that range was 0% to 30% for subcuts. So that gives you a ballpark that's how much could fluctuate assessments, anywhere from 0 to 30% difference just because of subcuts.
Do people feel like it's important to have some greater definition on that rather than kind of the endpoints, kind of where that has been? I think we're making some big recommendations here, and the more detail we can have on how that has been historically, I think that will help us in our ultimate decision.
How about, because as Chad said, to try to figure it out on every project is really mind-boggling. Chad, do you want to, I know you figured it out on the area that Ahmed lives in, because that was about a $4,000 add to his cost, correct?
It was in that range, yep. I guess I would just add, Chip, is it going to change people's decision to remove it? I mean, I think I've heard almost everybody in the task force so far wants to remove that item from assessments.
Well, I don't know. For my seat, I'd say if it's happens, 1 out of every 20 projects, I might look at it differently than if it's
ask. Yeah, that's a different ask. That I can go in and see if it happens, if it actually happens 20% of the time. But the level that it happens at, that takes a lot more in-depth analysis.
Okay.
Well, I guess my understanding, Chad, was that there's basically, with the street reconstruction that we're looking at, there's always a subcut component to it. Sometimes it might not be much of any cost, and sometimes it's a big cost. But my understanding is that there's always something there, and that may not be the case. But I'm trying to, understand if it really is an issue, like I said, 1 out of 50 times or 3 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I would guess at least half of our projects have a subcut.
Okay, so Chad, do the easy math, not the hard math. If there's any, I think we asked you the project about, why am I always blank on this neighborhood? The project just east of Country Club that we went to court on recently.
Yep, White Oaks.
Yeah, I think there was a subcut issue there. So maybe look at just the last, really the last few years where it's gotten high, if those are ones that were significant, but don't go back through all of them. Kathy, you've had your hand up for a little bit.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think from what I've heard and listening to this discussion, I think the subcut issue is really a very small detail compared to our whole assignment, of figuring out really how to pay for streets. I think if we look at it, like Ann, you were saying, which I agree with, that, if the subcut wasn't done right, why should people pay for it now? It's more of a philosophical question than really something to help us figure out a new system going forward. I think we should figure out the new system, and subcuts are, I think, a small detail of that.
I'm not going to argue with you about that, Kathy, but I think what we were doing right now is asking for other additional information we might need before the 12th. And that's what Chip was asking of Chad. So don't worry about that.
I'm sorry.
Ralph, I see your hand up.
So I think that, the question's been put before the group is, do we see this as a frequency issue or as an unfair allocation of past errors? And I think those are two different questions. And so I think that my view is that it doesn't make any difference how often it happens, if it's even just 1 in 100, that if it's a drive of a significant cost, and what Chad had shared earlier in the very early meetings was that in some cases it is a very significant cost of the overall project, that it's something that should be borne by the city, regardless whether that's 1 or 20 times. So if we maybe take just a thumbs up, thumbs down on frequency or fairness.
That's a good question. So let's do a thumbs up question on that. Would you take the subcut out because you don't think it's fair for the resident to pay, that it should be something that the city had mandated the street be built on the right subsoil originally? So would you take the subcut out because of that?
Can I make a comment before I wanted to make a point before we took a vote on that, if I may?
Sure.
Really quick one. I think that if So remember, Dawn mentioned last week, that like 2 weeks ago in last session, that we're going to have we have to come up with some sort of a funding for subcut if we do that. So I'm thinking that if we're going to do some sort of a public financing in the form of taxation, whatever, that subcut issue becomes subsumed in that. So whether I don't know how much of a value is the discussion of whether we should remove the subcut or not remove the subcut if we're going to go towards partial or full taxation of the projects, because we're going to have that subcut is going to be part of that, because there is no funding, right, Don? There is no extra funding for that. So to that extent, I don't know how valuable is our discussion about subcut. Just that's a point I'd like to make.
Right. So you don't really want to vote on it based on that. You just don't think it has value.
I'm going to probably abstain on that then in that case.
Fine.
Yeah. Okay. That's
fine. And I know Matt doesn't like the subcut. So even though we don't have his video, I know where his thumb would be. Chip, did I see you vote or not vote?
Yeah, you saw me vote with a thumbs up.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to belabor this thing. I would disagree with the way you phrased it somewhat, but that's okay. I mean, I think
fine. I wasn't trained as a lawyer, nor was I an English major like my mother, so I won't be offended. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up before our next meeting that they think that we need more information on? If so, raise your hand.
I guess I don't know, but the best way to ask this, Anne, but maybe it's just a request to have it on the agenda when we get together is, okay, what are the pluses and minuses of an assessment structure compared to just putting it in the tax base?
The pluses and minuses of what? I didn't.
Of using assessments rather than just throwing it. I mean, it seems like assessments propagate legal disputes. They sometimes delay projects. They must cost money to run. So what's the benefit apart from moderating published tax rates? I mean, why would we prefer to have an assessment rather than otherwise?
Chad?
I'm not going to answer that question, but there is one document I provided, and I don't remember what meeting it was, where I had put together options for the council work session, special assessments, property, and I and staff put together our own pros and cons.
Okay, I'll look for that. Thank you.
So I could resend that, or if you want to look back. Not saying they're right or wrong. It was just something we had put together at the time.
Do you want to just
sending that? Yeah.
Excuse me, will you resend that just so that everyone
Yep.
knows where to find it and can read it? I think that might be better than going back on.
Okay.
I will.
Is there anything that anyone needs printed out from Chad before we meet on the 12th? Okay, I don't see anyone needing anything printed out. We have some questions for you, Chad, that you've not noted. We have some questions for our attorney. And Don, you seem to think that if we ask you what the assessment cost, a jump in assessments, or not assessments, in taxes would be for, so we're going to start with anything from as simple as taking out the subcut and maybe lighting, to then percentages of moving forward towards 100% taxation or a 50-50 or wherever we are in between. So you can just do those on your calculator on the fly.
So, yeah, sure. But Chad, do we have technology in the room we're going to be in so we can actually project a spreadsheet?
Yep.
Or
Yep. I bring my computer, there's a screen. I'll have big pieces of paper on the wall where we can scribble ideas and notes and stuff. So it's not a whiteboard, but paper. And I can run through the questions that I have for the meeting. And then I know Dave had a hard stop at noon. So if there's anything we need yet. We have about 9 minutes.
Okay, Ahmed?
Really quick, with Anne's permission, I'd like to ask Don if he could. I recall Don mentioned something that on average our tax incidence for the full taxation would go up by, I think, was it 7% or something? What I'd like to ask is if you could have a number rather than saying the delta, if you will, have a number where our incidence is without and the actual tax incidence is without and then with, so that we could see the actual numbers. Like if let's say it's 1.33% versus 1.45% or something to that effect, if that's okay. Thanks.
You know, often when we talk about taxes going up, at least on a council level, we talk about it on the medium size house, which is up to, what is it, 5 something in value now, Don?
Yeah, 551.3.
So when we talk about this, Don, do you feel there's a need based on what you've heard the council ask that we talk about just that middle number, or do you want to talk about a lower value house, a medium value house, and a higher value house?
So we could, so we can do it across the board. So that calculation isn't hard. Really the only number we ever focus on is the tax impact of the median value home, though. I mean, that seems to be the standard for most communities, but we can certainly show examples for higher value homes and lesser value homes.
Matt, do you have a question?
Yeah. So with respect to those figures, Don, so I understand the median value home. I was wondering if it would also be helpful, or if you're able to do this. So you're going to talk about the median value home. Property taxes, as we know, hit everybody. So I'm hoping that there's a way you can talk about the percentage change as well, and kind of display that. And I'm just making the observation because, you might hear the number $500 on a median value home, and it might not sound like a lot, but it might be very different for other people. And I don't, I just think that's a better way to look at it, I guess, is how I'm saying.
The other thing I think I'm going to want you to have, because I know the council always relates back to what will that do to where we are with our surrounding communities and where they tax. Because one of the arguments always is this is the month that they set the highest tax change, the mill rate that we can do, and then it's finalized in December. But one of the discussion points often, and I don't know if they had it again this year on council, Don, is where does that leave us compared to our neighbors? So we're going to probably at least want to know that, because it's going to come up as a council. And Ralph, I saw you raise your hand.
So I think that's a very good and fair question. What I'd ask is that Don also roll into that what the special assessments are in those cities with respect to street funding or what have you, so that we have an apples to apples, because it's not fair to say, well, gee, we're raising our taxes above other cities, when in fact all they do is choose to tax the residents in a different fashion.
Sure. The one thing I'll tell you that I used to get letters on, and I don't know if this is relevant to you or not, but is that people would tell me they would want to pay the 10 or 15 years of street reconstruction instead of a higher tax rate for the next 30 years of living here. So it's just a piece of information. And that's what I'm hoping that we'll have then after our meeting on the 12th, is we'll have a couple plans to put out there. We will get it on the city website where people can respond. I'll be interested to see what the response is. I've already gotten a number of letters of people that are paying an assessment that don't want our task force, to create more taxable dollars on them now while they're paying. So, we're already getting some input, but I'm just, I'll be curious, and I want you guys to see how residents feel about this, because, we can come up with what we think is the perfect solution. and we can be totally shut down in a matter of minutes on how our residents feel about it. Chad, were you going to say something?
I was just going to wrap up. Go ahead. I think if others got comments.
Hey, Ann.
Chip just raised his hand.
Yeah, well, I was, Chad and I are talking the same language. It's just wondering, as we get to the witching hour here, what assignment should we have for that to think about or prepare ahead of time for that session, our next session in person?
Well, I got the questions that myself and Don and the attorneys got to work. So Don's going to work on debt information. Looks like the options are somewhere between 30 and 100% property tax special assessments. David will talk about, is there legal ways to explore a transition to make those recently assessed properties whole? I'll look at the subcut questions. I'll also get you the notes on that council work session of pros and cons and special assessments. Then Don's going to work on tax calcs on median family homes, the percentage change, where does that compare to neighbors, and what are those neighbors doing for special assessments? The only other thing I wanted to just verify is, since we are on camera, who was assessed previously? And I think it was Matt, Ann, David, and Kathy, right? Those are the 4 that have been specially assessed in the past.
That's what I have in my notes.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
David has asked Ann and Matt to respond to the idea of why someone should still have some portion paid in assessments. Isn't that what you asked Matt and Ann to speak to next time, David?
Yes, David asked, he would like to understand the benefit of special assessments.
Yeah.
Right.
I noted that earlier. Yep.
Yeah, you did in a different way. Sorry. Don, you were going to talk to Ellers too, just about bond rating. I don't really have any specific challenge to you for the next 3 weeks, other than having listened to everyone at this meeting. Is your path forward to this idea of between 100% assessment, 50% assessment? Has your path changed at all, and what would it be? I think that's really what we're trying to hammer out now.
Hey, Ann.
Ahmed?
This is Matt.
Oh, Matt, sorry.
Yes.
Matt first, Ahmed second.
Okay, sure.
Oh, you mentioned that you'd received a number of letters from people. If you with the rest of the members, because I haven't received those letters. I'd just be curious what people are saying.
Oh, they were forwarded to me from the mayor, a couple of them. Chad, do you have them?
Only 2, and what I've been saying is that the task force, when they're ready, we're going to put up a big web page. We're going to get feedback. We're going to gather it from all the residents in the community at that point, because they're not even responding to anything that you've put out yet. So they're just
they haven't.
out blank comments.
Got
so
it.
I don't know if that's really official or not at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure I knew what people were saying. So if you want to wait and do that, that's fine by me.
Okay. Ahmed?
A real quick one. In putting this website, putting this on the web for people's feedback, I think it'd be important for people to know those communities that are going to come up for a special, like a schedule, that are going to come up for special assessment, so that they have full information in terms of their decision, which way they want to go. Not just those that have paid into special assessment, but those that are going to be coming up within, let's say, next 5 years or something. That would be helpful piece of information.
We can talk at our meeting on the 12th of what people would want on that website. I know David had to leave at noon, but that can be an agenda item for our meeting on the 12th, as to what information besides any potential solutions we have. Anything else? Ralph?
Just one more quick item. The idea of a special fund has been held out by yourself and Matt. I'd be interested to know how big that fund, you intend that fund to grow to, assuming, as an example, that I think Don has said we spend between $3 to $5 million a year, or call it $5 million a year in street reconstruction. How big do you see that fund being at 25 years or whatever point in time in the future?
Sure. Okay. Anything else? Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.